How can a spectacular military victory, one of the greatest of its time, actually cause the complete and total collapse of an empire? It sounds like a paradox, right? Well, today we're going to dive into exactly that story, the Brusilov offensive, an operation that was both the Russian Empire's finest hour and the very thing that triggered its final downfall.
All right, so let's set the scene. Picture it. It's early 1916 on the Eastern Front. For 2 years now, millions of men have been stuck in this horrific, grinding war. The front lines are just hundreds and hundreds of miles of trenches, mud, and barbed wire. It feels like an absolutely unbreakable stalemate.
But something had to give. Way over on the Western Front, the Battle of Verdun was an absolute meat grinder. It was literally bleeding the French army dry. So Russia's allies, they were desperate. They turned to the Tsar and pleaded for an attack. Anything, really, to just draw some German troops away from France and give them a little breathing room.
Now, the pressure on Russia was huge, but honestly, nobody expected much. Expectations were rock bottom. Their last big attack, the Lake Narok offensive, had been a complete and utter disaster. The Russians took horrifying casualties for basically no gain at all. So the Central Powers, they were pretty complacent. They figured the Russian army was just this big, clumsy, ineffective force.
But one man saw things differently. He believed there was another way, a better way, and his vision would completely shatter the old rules of war.
So this is General Aleksei Brusilov. He goes before the Russian High Command, they called it the Stavka, and he proposes something totally audacious. He wants to launch a massive offensive, not just to help the Allies, but to try and knock Austria-Hungary out of the war for good. But the other generals? Oh, they hated it. They remembered the last disaster and wanted to play it safe, stay on defense. They thought Brusilov's plan was just plain reckless. And here's why it was so radical. Brusilov basically took the World War I playbook and threw it in the trash. See, the standard tactic at the time was insane. You'd pound one tiny section of the enemy line with artillery for days, basically telling them exactly where you were going to attack. And then you just send waves of men over the top to get mowed down. Brusilov's idea was different. It was surgical. Short, sharp, surprise bombardments all along the front, followed by attacks in many different places at once to confuse the enemy. It was like using a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. And the level of detail that went into the deception was just incredible. He wasn't just changing tactics, he was playing mind games. He broadcast fake radio traffic. He sent out messengers with false orders, actually hoping they'd get captured by the enemy. He built dummy artillery positions. The enemy was completely in the dark. They had no idea where or even when the real attack was coming. And so, with the stage perfectly set, the curtain finally went up. June 4th, 1916, the offensive began.
Now look at this map. The plan itself was just beautiful in its simplicity. Instead of one big, obvious arrow pointing to one spot on the map, Brusilov planned for lots of smaller attacks all across a massive 300-mile front. The whole idea was to poke and prod everywhere at once, find the weak spots, and then just pour his reserves through the holes.
And the results? They were immediate, and they were absolutely spectacular. The surprise artillery fire just ripped the enemy lines to shreds. Within a single day, Russian infantry punched through not just one, but 2 lines of defense. By day 3, an entire Austro-Hungarian army was in a full-blown chaotic retreat. And by day 4, the key city of Lutsk had fallen. It was a breakthrough that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. And if you want one number that sums it all up, here it is. 70%. In just 96 hours, the Austro-Hungarian Fourth Army lost 70% of its strength. That's not a defeat, that's a total disintegration. As you can see on this map, over the next few months, the results were just dramatic. The entire Russian line surged forward, pushing deep into enemy territory. Brusilov's plan didn't just work, it had completely shattered the stalemate on the Eastern Front. In fact, famous historians like John Keegan have called it the single greatest victory of the war up to that point. It achieved all of its goals. It took the heat off the French at Verdun, it battered Austria-Hungary, it even convinced Romania to join the war on the Allied side. It was, by all measures, a masterpiece. But, and this is a huge but, this is where the story takes a very dark turn. Because hidden inside this incredible victory was a fatal flaw. A price so unbelievably high that it would prove to be the breaking point for the entire Russian Empire. See, here's the crucial part you have to remember. Brusilov's attack was never supposed to be the main show. It was meant to be a distraction. The real main attack was planned for further north, led by that other, more cautious general, Evert. But what did Evert do? He went right back to the old failed human wave tactics, and his offensive was a complete bloody failure. This left Brusilov's victorious armies hanging out to dry, dangerously overextended with no support.
And this chart shows the absolutely staggering human cost. The numbers are almost impossible to wrap your head around. The Central Powers lost up to 1.5 million men. But Russia lost nearly the same number. Just let that sink in. To achieve this great victory, they paid an almost one-for-one price in blood.
And we're not just talking about numbers on a page. Russia lost the very backbone of its army. The veteran soldiers, the professional officers, the sergeants who actually hold units together. They were all gone, replaced by poorly trained conscripts. And with them went the army's fighting spirit. It just started to crumble.
You know, there's a classic term for this. It's a Pyrrhic victory. It means, yeah, you won the battle, but the cost of winning was so devastating that it basically guarantees you're going to lose the war. Russia won the offensive, but in the process, it bled itself completely white. So what was the ultimate legacy of this victory that cost so much? Well, it would end up reshaping not just Russia, but the entire world.
It really was a devastating domino effect. The offensive absolutely broke the Austro-Hungarian army for good. But at the same time, it broke the Russian army too. The catastrophic losses back home turned the Russian people against the war and against Tsar Nicholas II. It was the final straw that led directly to mutinies, the collapse of morale, and just a few months later, the Russian Revolution.
But here's the final incredible irony. The Imperial Russian Army, the army that executed this brilliant plan, would soon just cease to exist. It dissolved in the fire of revolution. And yet, Brusilov's tactical genius, his ideas, they survived. In fact, can you guess who studied Brusilov's methods the closest? The Germans, Russia's enemy. They saw what he did with surprise and infiltration, and they adapted and perfected it, creating their own elite stormtrooper units, which they then used with devastating effect on the Western Front in 1918.
And that, right there, is the ultimate paradox of the Brusilov offensive. It was a tactical revolution, a brilliant plan that led to one of the war's greatest victories. But that very same victory demanded a price so high that it shattered an army and helped bring down a 300-year-old empire.
Which leaves us with one last fascinating question to think about. Can a victory be so complete, so all-consuming, that it becomes the very cause of your own destruction?